Yeah, this meeting is being recorded. If you want to change your name, please do feel free, but it is just like my face that shows. But yeah, hopefully, if you've been to one of these before, same situation as normal. If you haven't, please do make use of the chat function, which should be underneath you if you're on desktop, laptop, that kind of thing. You can pop your little messages in the chat and I will see them and I can answer any of your questions. So last thing really, just to introduce myself. So for those of you who haven't met me before, my name is Jo Southall. I'm an independent occupational therapist and I specialise in supporting people with complicated long-term conditions. I also live with hypermobility, DS, POTS, visual stress, extra hip issues and all kinds of other random stuff. So yeah, mostly what I talk about in these sessions is a mix of personal experience, clinical experience, and whatever the evidence base has come up with. So if you have any questions about managing or living with your conditions, please do pop them in the chat and I will be quite happy to answer them. Have I got any pre-asked questions? I should have asked that in advance. Link Fairy is also not with us, so I've got substitute Link Fairy this evening. I'm just going to double check I haven't got any pre-asked questions. I had it in my head, now that I say that there was one left over from last time. So let me just sort that out. Please do make use of the chat in the meantime. Let me just double check. Lisa, I don't know if you've got the questions from last time. I'm just concerned I've missed one that was last time now. It's going to bug me if I can't find it. No, none. Okay, fine. All right then. Does anyone have any questions this evening? At all? Okay, lovely. So, question number 1. I have a lot of problems with the base of my thumb, feeling like it pops out of place. It does it when doing anything or almost nothing. Highly relatable there. I can pull it back in place, but when it does this too often, it gets pretty painful. I wear a wrist and thumb splint for work for typing at the recommendation of an OT, but don't want anything that rigid for my downtime. I've tried kinesiology tape at the base of my thumb, and that works really well from a thumb point of view, but my skin doesn't tolerate the tape for more than about an hour and then gets very itchy. Well, okay. So my question is, do you have any suggestions for something that works like kinesiology tape, as in is supportive, but allows movement, but that doesn't stick to my skin? Yes, okay. So one of your options would be to look at a thumb brace that immobilizes these joints in your thumb, but doesn't immobilize your wrist. So what that would do would give you really rigid support, but in a much smaller area. So you would hopefully be able to actually use your hands slightly more effectively. And you're not going to risk kind of deconditioning quite so much because you're not as immobilized. So there are a couple of like push brace, do a CMC thumb brace, which is a really, really good one. And the other one I really like, its name currently escapes me and it will come back to me shortly. Health and Care sell it, brain. I'll Google it in a second. I'll find a link for that. But yeah, so there's one that kind of immobilizes these two joints, but leaves you the ability to do that and the ability to move your fingers and the ability to move your wrists. Your other option for something kind of compressy, but not like sticky, would be just compression gloves. So often these are sold as arthritis compression gloves, but generally any kind of compression glove would do the job. You can get some that are kind of sticky, like dots on them. So they're like grippy, which are quite good if you are using them with mobility aids as an example, or there's anything where you don't want to risk your hands kind of sliding around because there's fabric on them. So the grippy dot ones are good for that. They're not so good for anything where you actually want to be able to run your hands along something. So some people have found issues with them if they're driving, as an example, because the grippy dots stop you from sliding your hand around the wheel. Likewise, arts and crafts, if you're trying to get like yarn or anything to run through your hands, grippy dots, not good. But for things where you need extra grip, those are a good idea. Mostly compression gloves are fingerless, so they come up to sort of here-ish and then don't go any further. And a benefit of that is that you can still use touch screens and you can still use keypads and you can still type without having a load of stuff on your fingertips, basically. So compression gloves would be a good thing to try. I do particularly like a company called Chronically Colourful because they make tie-dye compression gloves, which are just oh so much more fun than the variations on beige and grey that you'll get from pretty much mobility stockists anywhere. I like them so much, I got my own referral code. So if you put in Jo10 at the checkout, you can get 10% off. So yeah, those are like a really kind of cool option. Obviously, other brands of compression glove are available, etc. But yeah, tie-dye is much more fun. Your other option, if you want something that's a bit of a hybrid between bracing and compression, would be to look into getting a referral to NHS orthotics, not podiatry to get shoe orthotics, but orthotics, the department, to get splints and braces. So there are a couple of companies that I've mentioned before, specifically in relation to hip bracing. So companies like DM Orthotics, like Jobskin, and I think Allard UK do them as well. Basically, these companies custom make compression garments that are designed to fit exactly around your body and to support you in exactly the way that you need supporting, etc. One of the things a lot of them make are gloves. So what you could have is a set of custom-made compression gloves with zips built in so you don't injure yourself trying to get them on and off. But they can also build extra reinforcement around that thumb to really stabilize it. I might even have a picture, actually, that I can hold up in my stash of miscellaneous occupational therapy booklets just over here. Give me a second. Let me see if I can find a picture. I'm trying to find something to hold up because I think it would really help to explain. No, they don't appear to have gloves on any of the advertising. That's really annoying. Trust me, they do make them, honestly. I think they are on the website. If you have a look on the DMO website, you'll be able to find them. But yes, custom-made compression gloves like that would be a better option. The downside to those is that if you can't get yourself an NHS referral, they're going to be much, much more expensive. They do also require specialist fitting, so it can be a good number of weeks between you actually having an appointment with an orthotist and you physically getting an item that you can use. On the NHS, some orthotics departments do still have quite long wait lists, so it can be a bit of a challenge getting those, but they would be really, really worth it if you work with your hands and you want that combination of support, but not the kind of rigidity of being in braces. So hopefully that helps a little bit, but I definitely think that would be your best bet. I'm just going to see if I can find the thumb brace I was talking about. Sorry, I'm a little bit frazzled. It's been one of those days today. The brain fog is a big issue. Thumb brace. I think it's the Rhizo Forte. Rhizo Forte. Yeah, Rhizo Forte from Actimove. So RHIZO Forte, FORTA. And Actimove is the company, and that's my favourite thumb brace for immobilising just these two bits whilst leaving the rest of your hand actually functional. So that one I do really like. Measuring for that's pretty simple as well, so that's something I'm fairly confident most people could manage without needing to go via orthotics as well. So hopefully that's helpful, and best of luck with your thumb issues. Oh, the company names. So the first one was Push Brace, and it's the CMC thumb brace. And then the second, the actual like compression garment companies are DM Orthotics, Job Skin, and Allard UK. So hopefully that's okay. I can pop them in the chat if that's like not all right. Please do ask again. Okay. Are hypermobile people more likely to break bones or just more likely to fall over, twist, etc., and then break a bone? This is a really interesting question. So if you're looking purely at like hypermobile EDS and like hypermobility spectrum disorder, the risk of breaking bones is actually the same, if not less, than for non-hypermobile people. So I've had a heck of a lot of like accidents and injuries in my time. I have never broken a bone. And I actually had a specialist physio and an orthopedic person comment on the fact that I've managed to kind of get dislocations in ways that should have caused fractures but didn't. And it's like the way I think of it is that my body kind of has built-in crumple zones made of rubbish ligaments. So if I ever generate the amount of force needed to break a bone, instead I tend to just dislocate things, which isn't necessarily better, but tends to be the way it works for me personally. So the actual increased risk of fractures isn't a feature of most of the hypermobility disorders. However, there are a couple of ways this can become true. So the first one is that if you've got something like osteogenesis imperfecta, where you've got kind of brittle bones as part of the combination of connective tissue weirdness going on, you are much more likely to get fractures. Some types of osteogenesis imperfecta can be fatal in utero. Plenty of them can result in like fractures that are like atraumatic, like you just get broken bones from doing everyday tasks. The other way is that if you have fairly significant digestive problems and your body is not absorbing things like calcium and vitamin D, you can end up with bone fragility as a result of nutrient deficiency, effectively. So if your digestive system is particularly uncooperative because of your hypermobility, that can have a big impact. And you are right, falling over, if you fall over enough times, eventually you're going to do some bone damage. So yeah, protecting your joints is kind of part of that is falls mitigation. And if you are in an area where there's a hard surface and you know you're prone to falling over, taking some kind of proactive falls avoidance kind of stuff is quite sensible, and that might be compression garments, it might be mobility aids, it might be boots rather than shoes, it might be like holding hands with another person so you've got a little bit of balance feedback kind of stuff. So yes, essentially it can happen as a result of the fact that we just get injured a lot, but from a fracture perspective, biomedically speaking, we're not any more likely to get broken bones than anyone else. So yeah, I hope that sort of answers that one. Okay. Ooh. What's the best way to work on pelvic health? Kegels? I have to do very gingerly, not to overdo it. Hyperpressives, where you suck in your tummy, can be tough on the intercostals. Do you know what? I would actually specifically ask your GP for a women's health referral, or for like a urology specialist physio referral, if we're not talking about women's health here, but pelvic health. There are specialist physiotherapists, and their entire job is pelvic floor stuff, basically. And they often work as part of multidisciplinary teams, particularly for neurological type conditions and particularly for postnatal care. But there are basically physiotherapists whose entire job is getting your pelvic floor to work more effectively. And they are so specialist and so highly trained in that area that their wealth of knowledge is going to drastically outweigh anything I know. So I actually would see if you can get a referral there. These are available on the NHS, and actually from an outpatient physiotherapy perspective, in many areas now you can self-refer to physiotherapy, and that would include specialist physiotherapy services. So if you were to fill in an online physiotherapy self-referral, which you can find by Googling physiotherapy self-referral and your postcode, you should hopefully be able to basically get like a bit of support for that. And that would include assessing like, your muscle function, your pelvic stability as well is going to play a big part in that. But also coming up with a personalized routine that is going to factor in the fact that your muscles maybe get tired a little bit quicker than they should. So yeah, hopefully that is like useful. Okie dokie. Oh, the company name for the colour clubs, Chronically Colourful, are the tie-dyed ones. Okay, I have an issue with severe pain in my coccyx and seems to be baffling my MSK consultant with the cause. Wonderful. I have had a couple of injections which help temporarily, but the pain keeps coming back. That's a difficult one. Coccyx and sacroiliac pain are really interesting issues because from a physiotherapy perspective, it's really difficult to rehabilitate an area that isn't supposed to move in the first place. So the bits of you that are designed to hold that together, it should basically just be like a load of ligaments and connective tissue stuff. Stick it in place. Your SI joints and your coccyx and the rest of your pelvic spinal bits aren't really supposed to go anywhere. So in terms of rehabilitation, it's quite difficult to like build strength or stability for that because there aren't really any muscles covering that specific bit because it's not supposed to go anywhere. One of the things that might be useful, if it is kind of a subluxation-y issue in that your coccyx is basically wandering away from where it's supposed to be, would be to look at like cushions that have like a coccyx cutout so you're reducing pressure. So generally speaking, human beings, we spend a lot of our day sitting, but if you can take the pressure off that area, you may be able to reduce the overall kind of impact and the overall strain on that joint, which might help to kind of calm down that level of pain and inflammation. The other thing I would try would be a referral to orthotics, because I think if you can get a little bit of custom compression just to stabilize that whole area, you may find that has a knock-on impact for your coccyx. There is a sacroiliac brace that I recommend over all other sacroiliac braces, and that's the Sacrofix, SACROFIX. The reason I don't like other SI joint braces are because they're fantastic right up until you sit down and then they immediately ride up. Whereas the Sacrofix is basically a sacroiliac band attached to a pair of compression hot pants. It's not attractive. It's not stylish in any way, but you can hide it under baggy clothing. And what that would give you would be just a little bit of extra kind of squeeze compression. And you may find that's a helpful way to kind of stabilize things a little bit. If you can stabilize your entire pelvis, maybe your coccyx follows suit and just sort of behaves itself, I would hope. The other thing to try definitely would be a TENS machine. So TENS is transcutaneous electrical nerve stimulation, and it works on pain gateway. So if we think of our nervous system the way we think of Wi-Fi, there's only so much bandwidth for processing sensory input, right? So if we are looking to process all the kind of sensory stuff, pain is like quite a low priority signal. So your body doesn't kind of prioritize pain, which gives us a really nice loophole where if we clutter up the entire bandwidth with higher priority sensory information, we can drown out pain. So what TENS does is give you really high priority tingly kind of sensations. And if you have enough tingly sensations, you can't also feel ouchy sensations. So TENS I particularly like for low back and pelvic pain because it's wearable and you can just stick it on and go about your day. Just do watch out for trailing electrical cables when you go to the loo, because peeing on your own TENS leads is an issue. And I learned that the hard way, so don't do that. But other than that, I really, really like TENS. For that kind of sensation, that kind of pelvic instability, wobbly, crunchy, stabby kind of pain, it's not enjoyable. TENS can be a really good option for that. So yeah, maybe try TENS. You can also have a look at maternity electrodes. So there are two kinds of TENS connection typically. One is like push pins. So you've got like a metal sticky out bit and then like a hollow tubey bit that connect together. And the other kind sort of looks like poppers, like the clothing fastening poppers. So as long as you've got electrodes that match the kind of connection your TENS machine has, you don't necessarily have to buy them from the same brand. So you can buy any old TENS machine off the high street, and then you can buy maternity electrodes, which are double the size of the regular electrodes and give you a bit better coverage for treating large areas of pain or just really severe pain. So that might be worth a go, and I hope you get some relief. If the MSK team are completely, totally baffled, maybe consider a pain clinic referral, because pain clinics I find are a little bit more outside the boxy when it comes to like pain that doesn't have a really clear, here is what the problem is, kind of like manifestation, I guess. So yeah, maybe give that a go and see what they say. Okay. Sorry if I missed any cues that ask. Okay, can you please thoroughly explain the situation with micro tears of soft tissues so people can convey suffering? And the chat moved, hang on. Oh, convey suffering them to healthcare professionals. Okay, so the theory goes that basically people who have ligaments made of chewing gum and determination, like we do, would basically have a level of tissue fragility and a level of extra stretchiness that are problematic. We also tend to have really poor proprioception. So proprioception is your body's ability to work out where you are in relation to the rest of your own body, but also your environment. So good proprioception is what allows you to walk through a door frame without hitting the sides. Bad proprioception is what gets the door handle down your dressing gown sleeve and then yanks your arm back, and then you fall into the other side of the door frame. So with the micro tears, what we're basically talking about is the combination of overstretching and fragility causing teeny tiny amounts of damage simply because we're not cut out to survive everyday life. So if I was to roll my ankle in a really obvious, meaningful, I've sprained my ankle way, that would be a micro trauma. Sorry, a macro trauma. A micro trauma would be just me having slightly unstable ankles. Every step I take causes a little bit of wear and a little bit of tear, a little bit of a kind of issue. If I stumble or trip or scuff my toes into something, it might cause a teeny little bit more damage. No one of those individual causes of damage are a problem. Basically, the cumulative effect is the problem. So if you have a muscle and you've got a teeny tiny little bit of damage in it, fine. If your entire muscle is littered with teeny tiny bits of damage, your ability to function properly is reduced and your pain and inflammation go way up. So what we sometimes see is that a bad soft tissue injury can make your inflammation markers when you do like blood tests and stuff go up. So as an example, bad muscle trauma can give you a high creatinine reading because it's your body's way of processing out damage kind of thing. So sometimes what we'll see is that people with musculoskeletal conditions that result in injury a lot will have kind of chronic low-level inflammation that doesn't really point to any one cause or instance or accident or whatever. It's just that we're covered in tiny bits of damage everywhere. The easiest kind of phrase to relate to that for me is like the death by 1,000 cuts thing. So, you know, a paper cut, it's not terrible, it's unpleasant, but it's not going to cause you any major damage. But if you cover your entire hand in paper cuts and then try and write an essay, you can't do it because it hurts. Right? But logically, you know that those tiny paper cuts are not that bad. It's just really unpleasant, and you've accumulated enough of them that it's causing a significant functional problem. I hope that sort of makes sense. Like I said, a little bit brain foggy. Watching my face actually on video, I think I probably have a silent migraine because my facial asymmetry is a bit wonkier than normal, but we will see how that goes. It's interesting things you don't notice, but yeah, oh well. Okay. How do you get a referral to orthotics? Orthotics referrals can be obtained via your GP. You can ask your GP to refer you if you are under a consultant or a senior physiotherapist like Band 7 or up physio. They can actually refer you like sideways across the service. So if you're seeing a rheumatologist, an orthopedic specialist, if you're seeing like MSK or you're under anything like that, ask them if they can refer you, and if not, speak to your GP and they should be able to send you across. Okay. Do metal finger splints work better than plastic ones, or do they just look nicer? Interesting. Okay. So for anyone who has not seen those, here's my trusty stash of finger splints. So these metal ones are from Ring Splints by Zamil, and these are overlaid, standard overlaid ones. This is actually a really great example of why I prefer metal over plastic. And that's because when you drop the plastic ones and you can't find them and you stand on them, you get cracks in them like that. You can also get cracks in them if you are exactly the right combination of hypermobile but also really strong, or you do really high intensity tasks. So as an example, with my finger strength, I used to be a rock climbing instructor. I haven't been able to do that for a very long time, but when I stopped doing that, my finger strength was so good that it's only now starting to taper off into like normal finger strength levels. I've always been hypermobile in my hands, but I was also really strong. So what that meant was that if I was doing a task where I was applying a lot of pressure, I would bend the splint like that, and they snap. So I did that quite a few times with plastic ones. I have never done that with metal ones. So if you're doing anything that's high impact, or you are a manual wheelchair user, or you do any kind of crafty stuff where you're using like heat guns or anything that's like really kind of hot or intensive, there are some issues with thermoplastic. And the first one is that it's brittle, so it will snap. The second one is that the splints still bend. And the third one is that if you get these hot enough, you can melt them. So it's not normally an issue with like washing up water temperatures, but for anyone who works with hot stuff for like arts and crafts purposes, you can melt your finger splints. You can also melt the thermoplastic thumb braces that hand therapists make you. So those are my main issues with them. The metal ones, a couple of reasons I like the metal ones better is, firstly, if you drop it, it makes a noise. If it makes a noise, you notice when you dropped it. Whereas the plastic ones are silent, so if they fall off while you're going about your day, you have absolutely no idea at what point during the day they fell off, and it makes tracking them down really hard. The other things I like, other than them being stronger, is the fact that they look nicer. So I got asked about jewelry quite a lot, and actually from a skin tone perspective, the entire population is not this color. So although having things in beige feels like a natural neutral version, if your skin tone is not as pale as mine is, they don't actually blend in. They just don't. So you may as well have something that stands out and looks nice. So yeah, generally speaking, they last a bit longer. The plastic ones, when I was wearing them, I would average getting through maybe 3 or 4 a year, like per kind of one, just because I'm a manual wheelchair user, I'm clumsy, I'm strong, I do arts and crafts, I'm a gardener. Like I'm the wrong combination of things for looking after splints. The plastic ones, I've had the same ones for 7 years. I've lost one, I think, in all of that time, and I damaged one doing DIY with a hammer. But actually that saved my finger because the splint took the brunt of it. So probably a good thing. So yeah, there are a couple of reasons why. That said, if you are not into messy, hard work, arts and crafts hobbies, you're not particularly strong, and you don't use a manual wheelchair, there's no reason why this won't do the job, and it will do the job for a couple of quid cheaper her splint, which does add up. They're also a really nice way to test whether splints are going to work for you. And if you are as pale as I am and you want something subtle, they do the job. You can also, just putting it out there, paint them in nail varnish, because acetone-free nail polish remover doesn't do any damage whatsoever to thermoplastic splints. So if you wanted to match your manicure to your ring splints, that's an option with plastic, whereas it isn't with metal. So there are pros and cons to each, and I hope that has helped you with your decision-making process. Okay. Can visual disturbances, e.g. patterns on clothes, etc., flashing, etc., if looking at the screen coming from the brain, not the eyes, be associated with hypermobility conditions? Can these possibly be something that was there all along, but then worsened with acquired neurological conditions? Yes, you are spot on. Visual stress is actually one of the things I have, and that's the reason I have my nice tinty orange glasses on. So visual stress, scotopic sensitivity, Erlen syndrome, they're all names for fairly similar things. Visual snow is another one. A lot of dyslexic people struggle with things like this as well. The basic premise is this: my eyes work fine, or at least relatively fine, but my brain does not process visual information very well. So what I tend to find is that striker patterns, flashing lights, high contrast, going from light to dark, looking at sources of light, all that kind of stuff create like visual chaosy type situations. And I've got visual snow as well. So it kind of looks like badly tuned analog TV where it's all speckly. I think there is a correlation. I do not yet have proof there is a correlation. I suspect probably Jessica Eccles, Dr. Jessica Eccles, will be the person to prove it at some point, even if just coincidentally, because she's like an absolute whiz when it comes to neurodivergence and hypermobility type stuff. Anecdotally, I had the same optician from when I was 14 until I was 25, maybe. And what we did was just follow that optician to whatever practice she went to because she was fab. My opticians then kind of specialized as a visual stress opticians, and they started asking a couple of key questions when talking to people that had come in with visual distress type issues. And the questions they asked were, do you consider yourself double jointed and do you get travel sick? And almost every single person they spoke to said, yes, I'm double jointed and I get travel sick. So isn't that a fascinating coincidence? I've also done this from the other way around, where I'll talk to hypermobile people and we'll be talking about like fatigue, or we'll be talking about headaches, and I'll ask about visual stress symptoms and they'll go, oh yeah, well, I didn't think anyone could look at radiators without getting a headache. At which point I'm going, well, actually that's supposed to be okay, otherwise people wouldn't wear stripy clothes, etc. And I'll suggest they go and get screened for tinted lenses, and they come back and go, wow, this is a game changer. As for the whole getting worse over time thing, yes, essentially what I think the kind of main explanation behind this is that there's only so much time you can put up with something before your tolerance for it wears out. But equally, if you don't know something is a problem, and you don't really know like any different, it's very difficult to know at what point are you supposed to speak to an optician, or at what point are you supposed to go and see your doctor about something. So I do think there is a tendency for us to put up with stuff for longer than we should, and by the time we finally seek help, we're so burnt out with it that we're desperate for any kind of solution. And that's why it feels like things get worse over time. It's not that it's necessarily getting worse over time. It's that we're so frazzled we just can't cope with it anymore. That said, there are some things that can cause these things to get worse. So very much like POTS as an example. I've spoken to people with long COVID who've developed visual snow after having COVID. So there are kind of neurological, particularly along the ME viral kind of inflammatory response type spectrum, that do have things like this happen and do get worse over time, which is both fascinating and unpleasant for everyone involved. So yes, I do think there's a huge correlation. I don't have any proof for it yet. I suspect there will be more proof for it soon. Um, in the meantime, tinted lenses would be a very, very sensible thing to get yourself tested for to see if they make a difference in terms of symptom management. I've written a bit about this on my website, Tinted Lenses, and I've also written a bit about long cane training. So I went and had some guide cane training done because my night vision is particularly poor, and I found that when I was walking, the combination of slightly problematic night vision and terrible proprioception meant that I was tripping over a lot. So I went and had some long cane training with a sight loss charity and realized that actually I wasn't coping at all at night. As soon as I had a better option, I was like, oh, okay, this is much better. But yeah, it's very interesting the way that kind of proprioception is linked in with visual processing, which is linked in with sensory processing, which is all linked in with how frazzled our poor little brains are from being in pain and tired all the time. And then you chuck in a little bit of sleep deprivation on top of that, and before you know it, you just can't cope anymore. So yeah, it's a complicated issue. In short, I don't know quite what the kind of connection is, but I strongly suspect there is one. So yeah, let's see how that goes. Okie dokie. Okay. TENS. I really like using it for pain relief, but my skin doesn't like the pads. Are there any tips for using a TENS machine but not aggravating the skin? Can you use it over clothing? You can't use it over clothing, but I wonder if you could use it over like barrier creams. So you can get basically creams that are designed to create like a really fine barrier between your skin and whatever product you're applying to it. So a barrier cream, letting it dry down and then trying TENS over the top of it might be helpful. You may also find that it's beneficial to just move the electrodes slightly throughout the day. So if I use a lot of TENS, I can develop like a contact dermatitis type issue to it. And it's particularly bad in summer if you're like sweaty and you're getting kind of moisture trapped between the TENS machine and your skin. But moving the electrodes like every few hours allows me to keep using TENS, but doesn't let that skin irritation build up quite so much. So that might be worth a go. You could also try maybe a different brand for like the electrodes and see if the conductive gel makes a difference. Yeah, sorry about that. It's not really an ideal answer, is it? Okay. Sorry, the chat's all over the place today. What do you advise for posture management for people who spend a lot of time sitting or using a computer, specifically for shoulder pain? How long is too long to sit still? Thank you. That's a kind of how long is a piece of string level of question there. What you'll probably find is that your body has a very different tolerance to your colleagues' bodies, as an example. So it might be worth just setting a timer. At the point where you start to feel uncomfortable, take 20% off that, and that's how often you need to be having breaks. It may be that actually just a little bit of a stretch and a fidget and rolling your shoulders is useful, but that would at very least stop you accumulating quite so much kind of shoulder issues. One of the issues I think with sitting and shoulder problems is that if, I'm just going to try and angle it down so you can actually see my shoulders. It's quite dark, isn't it? Hang on. Ooh, is that better? Not really. Sorry. What can happen is if you're working with your hands down and you're focused on your typing and you're not really paying attention to your upper body, is for those of us with significant shoulder laxity, your shoulder just kind of drops out of the socket a little bit. Or you can get a lot of kind of pulling kind of feelings here because your body is trying to stop your shoulder from just sort of falling out of the socket. So one of the options I really like are having supports that basically work to prop your arms up. So from my handy Blue Peter stash of occupational therapy stuff, this is my favorite laptop armrest type situation. So this end clamps on your desk. This end here is angle adjustable and you can angle it up or have it flat. And basically, it's a series of pivots. So when you're using your computer, you have your arm on here, and your arm moves with the pivoting system so that this does the lift, the gravity assist, the prop your shoulder in your joint bit. And the only thing you're using your muscles for is directing your hands around the keyboard or around your desk. So this kind of thing can work really, really well for that. The original one was from Posturite. It is wonderful, but very expensive. If you are getting access to work to pay for your laptop equipment, fantastic, get the one from Posturite. If you're paying for yourself, get the bargain knockoff brand from Amazon, which is quite considerably cheaper and does the job just fine. So it's from a company called BONTEC, BONTEC. And if you put in arm support desk pivot type queries, you'll find it on Amazon. But yes, that's a really, really, really good thing for that sort of thing. And it does just kind of prop your shoulders up a little bit. So you're taking all that strain off your upper back and your neck and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I would definitely recommend some of those, particularly if you're doing a lot of typing or like computery work. They do also work if you are writing and drawing as well. Not quite as well, but it's still pretty good. So give that a go. Okay. So yeah, follow-up question to the visual stress one. One of the really interesting things that my optometrist has spotted is that people with visual stress tend to really struggle with eye tests because like we can't settle, when they do like the number one, number two, like is this better or is this better thing, and you kind of can't tell or your answers are really inconsistent. That's a really key indicator for visual stress. The other key indicator for visual stress is being really, really picky about your prescriptions. So I reckon maybe 50% of my pairs of glasses, the optician has said to me, for anyone else, I wouldn't bother writing a new prescription because it's so close to your old prescription that for most of the population, they wouldn't notice. Whereas for me, it makes a monumental difference. I'm so picky about it. So actually, the fact that you're struggling with your new glasses and finding it all a little bit kind of distressing and all over the place, visually speaking, during the test, would be key indicators of visual stress. So yeah, that might be worth a little investigate there in terms of, you know, coping strategies, etc. My daughter has hypermobility, suspects POTS or Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, being assessed for ASD and maybe ADHD, but I suspect dysgraphia, dyspraxia. But just wondered if it's linked as read dyslexia. Wondered, dyslexia is, but I'm not sure. But that's, sorry, I'm not sure if it's 2 years behind all her writing, can speak verbally, has trouble with cognition and memory, takes time to process information, trying to get EHC to be assessed for these, but often has been denied a few times. Is a referral to an OT best, or I was thinking an ed psychologist? Hopefully makes that sense. Yes, so basically there's a correlation between all of the variations of neurodivergence and all of the variations of hypermobility. So yes, from a dyspraxia perspective, particularly yes, but there's an interesting thing about dyspraxia. So almost all of the physical coordination symptoms of dyspraxia are already symptoms of hypermobility. However, the kind of cognitive brain processing symptoms of dyspraxia would be the key indicators. So if you're just looking at somebody and going, you're a bit clumsy, you fall over a bit, that's probably the hypermobility. You don't necessarily need a separate diagnosis. If it's the motor planning and the organizational type dyspraxia stuff, that would be a separate thing in addition to the hypermobility, if that makes any sense at all. But essentially, yes, it's probably all connected. You'll probably find that some variation of hypermobility is kind of like the root diagnosis, and then everything else is connected, if not to the hypermobility, but then connected to something else. You can just, people are just unlucky sometimes, and you just end up with more than one diagnosis, but quite often there is a connection between all the different things that are going on. An EHCP would definitely be sensible. I know some of my pediatric clients actually get their sessions with me paid for by EHCPs. So it is a thing. You can get private OT through EHCP funding. I would say OT is probably a sensible starting point, and it's probably a practical starting point. And I would have a look at symptom management, but like practical skills training, but also like coping strategies just to kind of plateau the situation, give you some idea on what to work on. And then if additional support is still required or there are areas that are still a real struggle, then EdPsych would be a great kind of add-on to that. Obviously, as an OT, I'm a little bit biased. I happen to think we're the best profession for most things. But yeah, definitely, I think pediatric OT would be really, really sensible. If the school has access to an occupational therapist, because some schools do, that would be a really brilliant thing to start with. Okay. If there's an extra page on the disability support application form, what sort of things should it be used to cover? Do you specify on that section that a phone interview is needed, or should that be put elsewhere, e.g. additional cover letter? Can you ask on that section for the length of time you're hoping to be awarded and give reasons why? If you ask for a longer award, would things like stating the condition's incurable have any weight? What would have a bearing on how long the award may be? Okay, so disability benefit, particularly things like PIP, I don't even consider asking for an award of a specific time. And I wouldn't even consider like the factors that go into that. A lot of it is absolutely nothing to do with your conditions, your diagnoses, your medical history, and everything to do with politics and bureaucracy. So essentially, you can have 3 people with the same diagnoses and they get a different award length of time based on other factors that frankly aren't even worth considering because it's mind-boggling. The last lot I did for myself, I didn't put anything on there. I just sent it back blank. You don't necessarily have to put everything, like every section doesn't have to be filled. If you've got nothing else to add, if you feel like your condition has been captured by the form so far, you don't have to add anything. However, if you feel like there are aspects of your conditions that are not going to be well understood, explaining that in greater detail on those sections is sensible. It may be, as an example, ways that your conditions connect up that isn't quite kind of captured well by the rest of the forms, or any additional struggles you have with one area of self-management because of another condition, as an example. It may be a good place to put things that are variable. So explaining that there's like a spectrum in terms of function between good days and bad days, as an example. But you may find that nothing else needs to go in there at all. I think there is a section on most forms as to whether or not you need a telephone interview. So if there isn't one, then yes, that would be a good place to put it. But yeah, I think the rest of it, it's not for us to decide, and they're not going to pay any attention to what we think anyway. And frankly, it's probably mostly a political decision rather than any kind of actual medical-based stuff. Equally, just because the condition's incurable does not mean that your function will remain the same. So often with conditions that can be degenerative, not progressive, degenerative, or where there are increasingly better options for pain management treatments, physiotherapy, etc., your function can change over time, becoming either better or worse. So there is a sensible reason to be reassessed every once in a while. At the reassessment point, if nothing has changed, you just write nothing's changed in every single section and post it back. That's it. You don't need to do anything else. So yeah, hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. But if you're given your award and nothing changes, you should maintain that award regardless of how often you're being assessed. But often with conditions where treatments are constantly changing, there is potential for progress, or there is potential for you to have had a really, really unlucky run of time and actually be in a worse position physically. So hopefully that sort of answers that one. For person retens, heard of an OTC antihistamine nasal spray to stop irritation from patches. May that help where TENS pads go, or would it not be advisable? I have absolutely no idea. Um, I would imagine antihistamine nasal sprays still have to cross the kind of skin blood barrier to get into your system in order to be like circulated around your body. But your skin is waterproof, so that wouldn't necessarily work. But that's probably a question you could ask a pharmacist and just see if that makes a difference. But actually, just taking antihistamines can help. So um, that's a really, really interesting one that needs some investigating. But I think that's a question for a pharmacist. But yeah, interesting. I like the outside the box thinking. Lovely. How are we doing for time? Okay. I've just been diagnosed with a bursitis and frozen shoulder via ultrasound scan. NHS Physio has requested I consider for a cortisone injection. Pain is horrendous. Naproxen, heat and ice, only just taking the edge off. Tight shoulders and neck as a result, having myofascial release once a month and acupuncture once a month. However, still not able to move much. Any suggestions for pain relief and increasing movement? I'm struggling to get dressed, brush and wash my hair, pull my knickers up. The struggle is real. Any gadgets or tips? Have the cortisone injection as soon as possible. Oh my goodness, that sounds really, really unpleasant, and I'm really sorry. I've had bursitis in my hips repeatedly, and it's not a pain I would wish on anyone. What else can we add to that? TENS, Epsom salt baths, really, really like hot, really salty, like Dead Sea, but hot bath temperature levels of Epsom salts. What else can we suggest? I mean, like reaching and grabbing tools, like a long-handled grabber, can be really useful, particularly the ones that have got a little hook on the grabby bit, because you can use them to like hook your knickers and pull up without having to be able to move your shoulder quite as far. Basically long-handled versions of dressing aids, so like a long-handled grabber, long-handled shoe horns, that kind of thing. Hair brushes as well can be quite a useful thing. And I would also consider a referral to orthotics to look at bracing, just because if your body is kind of tensing up to protect this joint, it shows some indication that it needs to be immobilized, like your body is trying to immobilize it. But that tension is going to be causing knock-on problems in all your other areas. So it may be that if you can give that joint the protection it needs to be stable, the rest of your body will calm down and you can work on building the strength up and increasing the movement with physio and with the myofascial stuff. But it might just give you a little bit of support for everyday activities and reduce the chances that you're going to be kind of injuring yourself from those. So, but yeah, that's a really nasty situation, and I really hope you get your steroid injections soon. If you are having steroid injections done, what I would say is get them done with ultrasound. So this is usually something that can be done just like an outpatient. You go in, you have your jabs, and you go home. But with ultrasound, there's a decreased risk of like missing, basically. So particularly if you've got any kind of skeletal abnormalities, but also just for hypermobile people with our weird squishy collagen joints, having it done with your ultrasound type stuff would probably ensure that you're getting the best chance possible. They'll probably give you this advice anyway, but when you have your steroid injection done, spend like 3 days in total rest mode. Like, don't move your arm any more than you absolutely have to for like rehab reasons. That's it. After that, when you hopefully get a drastic reduction in pain, that's a really, really good time to push yourself with rehab. So the aim is to give you a window in which you can rehabilitate super efficiently and hardcore, to get you hopefully past the point where you've got that level of inflammation and the level of instability and weakness. So if you know when you're having your steroid injection done, consider taking time off from your regular activities for that, and then getting booked in for like a lot of rehabilitation stuff, like a week later, to really make the most of the steroid injection. You can only have 3 steroid injections in any one joint in your entire life. There are people who push this. See, every professional football team physiotherapist ever. What tends to happen to people who push that is at some point you will suffer a catastrophic tendon rupture around that joint. For a hypermobile person, that is not something you will recover from. You just won't. So I recently had this conversation because I've used up 2 of my 3 steroid injections in each hip. So if you can, really, really, really focus on the rehab and to stretch out the time between them and to really maximize the gains you get from that window of being functional and hopefully pain-free, it is a really sensible thing to do, because it's not something you can just keep repeating for the rest of your life at this current point in time. It may be that future rounds of steroid injections are better and we can do that, but for now, at least strongly advised you only ever have 3. And actually for a hypermobile person, yeah, my consultant was adamant that particularly for hypermobile people, you don't push that number 3. So yeah, hopefully that's sort of helpful, and I really, really hope it works well for you. The first time I had it done was an absolute game changer, so I'm crossing my fingers that you get the same level of support from that. Okie dokie. Okay, this will be my, sorry, chat's going all over the place again. Last question to cram in. Is it common to suddenly suffer very specific pain in a ligament or tendon and severe tenderness, taking months or even years for the pain to go, but not being aware of having done the original injury, e.g. one was an ankle sprain without any indication? Yes, essentially. Part of that is because we have a tendency to get delayed onset pain from things. And part of it is that we injure ourselves often in quite dramatic ways without there being any kind of severe incident. So 2 or 3 of my worst injuries have been in my sleep, and I've just woken up unable to function in really severe pain. And I mean really horrible, scary injuries, like things in my spine not being where they're supposed to be, level of injury, whilst asleep. So there wasn't obviously there was an incident that caused that injury. I'm not aware of it happening. That can also happen when we're awake, in the sense that you've done a little bit of damage, or you've done a little bit of twingy damage or something, and your brain and body have just not processed that to the extent that you're aware of it happening, which is super inconvenient for all of us, because if we were aware of these things happening, we could do something about them slightly more efficiently. One of the things I do recommend because of this is actually using micro breaks to check in with your body. So just taking sort of 10 to 30 seconds regularly, all the time throughout the day, to just check in and go, how am I feeling? Are my arms and legs attached? Am I hungry? Am I thirsty? What's going on with my body? Paying attention to those things can give us a much better indication of, have we recently sustained any injuries? And you're more likely to notice them sooner rather than later. If you're noticing these injuries sooner rather than later, you can treat them sooner, and the treatments will be much more effective. So training ourselves to check in with our bodies a lot is a really good way to kind of improve that. But yes, essentially it can happen that we just kind of do things, we don't really know why, but obviously we've done something. And slow recovery time is very much a well-documented part of hypermobility, unfortunately. So yes, it can happen. Chronic pain is a very weird thing. Hypermobile bodies are prone to doing weird stuff. I wish I could give you a solution to those, but at the very least, I can give you a kind of empathy type, one of the team sort of solution. In terms of myofascial release, it's not an area I'm massively familiar with, other than the fact that a lot of my recent physiotherapy students have really enjoyed it. So I do have 2 physiotherapy students coming on placement soon. What I might do is try and bully them into joining me for a live stream and see if I can make them talk about it. But we will see. I won't actually bully them. I'll ask very nicely in a very supportive, practice educatory way. Failing that, Lisa of HMSA fame, perhaps we could investigate getting a myofascial person to come and join me for a live stream. and we will see what we can do to get you some proper quality information. I would like a physiotherapist to come at some point, so we'll get one. I will summon one from somewhere to join me at some point in the future. Okay, this brings us up to 8 o'clock. I am pleasantly surprised by how busy that's been, because I really didn't think we would get many people. So thank you all for coming and keeping me busy and amused. And I hope this has been a really useful session. And yeah, please join me again next month. And in the meantime, have a wonderful Easter bank holiday. And I will hopefully see you next time. Take care. Bye.